used to have an activity called a mock reading, which is really you guys can do it too. They would write their essays, then they'd have to type them, Times New Roman font size 12. Everybody had Times New Roman font size 12. If you forgot to type it, you could put your regular essay in, but if people had a problem with that, that was on you and that was on you, the student, and not the teacher, because the teacher said Times New Roman font size 12 for the peer review or the mock reading. And then the kids would put their R2D2s on the back and they would write comments, and they were always supposed to be critically helpful, not don't just say this was terrible. Say, praise and polish, maybe, was what I had them do. But I used to have them do that, and then they'd keep their handwritten papers at their desk, and then I'd say, okay, they're all at the front, come find yours. And the kids would be sitting there going, oh, this one's mine. Just wait. And they'd literally read, and they'd be like, I don't know which one is mine. And I was like, oh, you mean 6 of you started the exact same way? 8 of you used the exact same evidence? Now go find your handwritten paper and start reading and tell me how many sentences you have to read down to till you know which one is yours. And it was like an aha moment for all of them, because they all thought they were glorious and unique. And they quickly realized we're all saying the exact same stuff. So that's an exercise that you can do as well in your classroom. Maybe just with a paragraph. You don't have to do it with whole essays. I'm learning that you can do a lot of this work with smaller portions of writing. So one of the other things I wanted to point out and I wanted us to look at is just, this is a big question that we get over and over in trainings, is the citing, how we must cite. I know that as English teachers, we want to teach MLA. MLA is the proper way to cite. We want the kids to understand that, and it is, and you can teach it. You are an English teacher after all, feel free. But it is not the only way that citations are allowed to be like beaned, we'll call it, a bean in the bucket on the FSA. The language is just that the sources have to be attributed, meaning we have to know they didn't come from you somehow. And so you can see here that this particular student chose to call it by source 2, source 3, in parentheses, which is sort of an MLA thing. This student, author, triggered the author's name and the article title. Often used the author's last name, Robert Duffer, in his article, in addition in Rosenthal's article, so chose to use author's last name. This is not citations at the end. This is in the body of the text, but I called it trigger phrasing and chose the author's name predominantly. Here's the rule. When you give the source a name, the name must remain the same throughout the paper. So if you call it source 2, it's always source 2. Don't start calling it by the author's name later. We get confused, don't we? Think of a baby. If they're Sarah, 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 and then tomorrow they're Bobby. And then next week they're, the child won't know what the child's name is. So once you give a source a name, you must use that name. That's the rule of sourcing. Now, the other rule is you'll notice that they like a variety of transitional phrases and a variety of citations. So here's where the variety comes in. Sometimes they're happy if you put source 2 at the end in parentheses, but it would be just as effective. It's really not effective at all, but if you said source 2 claimed, it's still the same name, but you're going to use a variety of ways that you reference the source. Got it? So that's the rule. They would like us to, it will show more sophisticated writer if they're not always citing exactly the same every time they do it, but they do, the name must remain the same. The name must remain the same. Preferably, and you'll notice I didn't even underline anything over here yet. Well, this is all anecdote. This one does eventually have sources, but preferably the more you paraphrase, the more it sounds like you're saying it. It's almost like you can trick the reader to hear it. Paraphrasing, there's kind of a rule about it on Owl Purdue website, and basically if you were to change the words in what you read and it made it less beautiful, like you would always quote some of the lines of Shakespeare, you'd never try to say in your own way some of the things that Shakespeare says, because they're beautifully written and the power sometimes comes in quotable remarks. Those are always quoted. and you quote things that maybe you don't understand well enough to paraphrase them properly, and then everything else you paraphrase. You're supposed to pretty much paraphrase everything else. But you have to reference it. You have to give credit to who said it. That's what I always told my kids, give credit to who said it. But paraphrasing is a more sophisticated style of attributing sources and keeps it in your voice. So there's a thing called a purple patch. And a purple patch is when all of a sudden this romantic or fancy language is like patched into a paper when somebody quotes, and it goes from sounding like something you could hear, I don't know, like in a regular classroom to the Shakespeare stuff, and it doesn't fit. That's called a purple patch, and it's a logical fallacy. So you don't, if you paraphrase everything in your own words, there's no patches. There's no clear patches in your paper. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out, because citations are a big thing that kids ask about. They're a big thing that teachers worry about. Teach what you want to teach them and teach them how to do that. And try to get them doing that however you think the best way is in your classroom. But if you get close to the end, right, it's FSAs in a week, and you still can't do MLA citations, you might release them to, and you can just say, source 2 said, and you're going to be okay, and they will be. That's not what kept this from being here, was the fact that they cited this way. That's not what did it. What did it? What's going on here? And I like that you said that. There is not one word, maybe one, maybe the first sentence a little bit, so I have to cross my fingers, but there's nothing that came from the student at all. Right? But look, there are 2 sources. So we have synthesis. But it is just a litany of info from the text, almost copied and pasted, could be copied and pasted right into the paper. So the kids need to know that having multiple sources support your paper is indeed important, but is it going to help you pass? According to this, the answer is no. That the elaboration that you add to the paper is more important. And I used to have my kids and also do this. I had a big poster in my room, and I would say claims we underline. I used highlighters a lot. We highlight them in this color. Evidence is highlighted in this color. Elaboration is highlighted in this color. And orange was our elaboration color, and yellow was our evidence color. And I'd say if it's not at least 50-50 in every paragraph, you failed. If there's not at least as much orange as there is yellow, then you're not talking, and nobody cares what the text said. We all read them. We care what you think about the text. So they started to get a visual lack of balance, and when it was more orange, their scores started going up. They started talking more, and then you have to teach them ways to elaborate, which is a whole nother different ways that you can elaborate on information, because I think that's possibly one of the biggest struggles that kids have, is figuring out how to elaborate. What about this one? What did you notice in the score point 3? Another significant reason as to why car usage should be lowered is the fact that it decreases the amount of smog and greenhouse gases in the air. Kids' words, right? If all you do for each sentence is say, came from the student's head, came from the text, right? We'd say 1, came from the student's head. Referring back to Rosenthal's article, she included how experts have said that the overuse of automobiles in Chicago and Shanghai has been a setback to the current efforts being used toward reducing greenhouse gases, which are emitted from the tailpipe. Came from the text set. For the tailpipe. Accordingly, in Paris, there was also partial driving ban to clean the air, and all the rest of that in Robert Duffer's article came from the text set. And then we've got, in addition, in Rosenthal's article, other article, The End of Culture, she wrote how Obama's plan to reduce the United States greenhouse gas output has been helped by the decrease in American, all that, also from the text set, right? And then finally, all in all, the reduction in car usage will result in a decrease in greenhouse gases. that will better the environment and benefit the world came from the student's head. So what's the difference between this one and this one? This one is only, with the exception of possibly the first sentence, this one has one little tiny bit of summary elaboration. Is this well put together? Does accordingly really go here? Is that a good transition for what happened? What does accordingly mean? Because of this, you're in a totally different city. This one is using transitions nicely, a lot of them, and by paraphrasing, it sounds, some of it, more like it's coming from the student's head. The transitions help with that, and maybe they got credit for all the transitions coming from them, the transitions and citations, but really, it's this with just a little bit more. This didn't have all the elements like the basics, right? This has all the basics, nothing special, but it has all the basics. Now, right? What's that one doing? How did that one start? Did it start with another significant reason? In the past decade, America has struggled with an obesity epidemic. What? What does that have to do with cars? Are you kidding me? What does it have to do with cars? It's a reason. It's legitimately a reason why we should reduce car usage. And it's a great anecdotal story, and it's not from the text set. It's the student's own observation about walking down a street, and what else is this one doing that these definitely don't do? Local market, Fifth Avenue, New York City's Manhattan. I think McDonald's is mentioned in here, blocks away. One of the things I want you to get to eventually is, if people were to get around and get exercise at the same time, there would be less stressed and healthier. That might be the claim and the point. And then she goes into, Andrew Selinsky quoted businessman Carlos Arturo Plaza in his article, Car-Free Day is spinning into a big hit in Bogota. Plaza said that limiting car usage is a good opportunity to take away stress. Do you see how this evidence supports the claim? It's specifically not even just good evidence. It's not just a good claim. It's like the exact right evidence and the exact right part of the evidence. I said you'd be less stressful, and I found a guy that's talking about how it made it less stressful for his people in that city. Many people are already doing this. Germany has a new car-free suburb in the town. People have to pay a heavy fine for parking on the edge of the street. People in the German suburb get a long fine without cars because of the way the city was built. So how can we make people happy? We have to build the cities right so that they can be happy, but it's the same idea that if I can get along fine without a car, I'm a happy person. So it all comes back to that logical progression of ideas, lots from the kid, enough, and just what you need from the student. But if I went through sentence by sentence, which we can't do in the elaboration paragraph because I don't even think I have enough digits to cover all the sentences that came from the student. But if we highlighted orange and yellow, wow, it'd be a whole lot of orange, wouldn't it? I think probably one of the main things I wanted teachers to understand is that you really can teach processes, and even the lowest performing students can perform when they're given sentence starters, when they're given functions. We could write an entire paragraph together where I say, now I want you to tell me what the topic is. Just write a sentence about the topic. Now I want you to, if I gave them directions and a process, students could be successful with this. All students at almost any level. So I wanted teachers to learn, part of the analysis work is to break down how good writers have done it as a possible model. And once they can get the functions of each of those sentences, they can create their own acronyms. The kids can create acronyms, they can create their own processes, and they can find different ones that work, almost like testing keys. Like this key opened the door, so did this one. This one didn't because what was missing? So then they can go in and figure out. And that's part of what we did when we were looking through those parts is we were analyzing just for words that came from the student's brain or words that came from the text set. Now we know you have to have words from the text set. That's one of the requirements of the FSA paper. but you also have to have words that come from the student's own head. And that's the elaboration piece, to be able to get a sufficient score in that category. So I wanted teachers to be able to see that you really can just mark these things, and that now it's no longer a mystery as to how a paragraph is well written. It's literally something countable. It becomes mathematic. To me, this is one of the most difficult things to teach kids, is how to elaborate appropriately. And I found one of the best things I ever did was tell my students that they were not allowed to use the transition "this means." Because as soon as they said "this means," they were just going to restate. And they weren't going to do anything that built on that information. So I used to have a podium, and I had it the last year I was a teacher. We painted it in chalkboard paint. Actually, I had a student do it for volunteer hours. It was fantastic. So we painted it in chalkboard paint, and I just put Miss Mosley's dirty words. And one of the phrases was "this means." You're not allowed to say it. If I see it in a paper, you're losing points. That's it. And so we just wrote down whatever the dirty words of my classroom for education were. And they'd add them, and they'd catch me saying them, and I'd be like, oh! But we made it fun by putting it on the podium. So you could have a list that says, don't say these words in your essay, because they don't help you. So one of the ways is to give them a list of transitions that transition into different types of elaboration that they can use. So to exemplify this point, what's coming next? A story, right? This can be compared to, now you got an anecdote, or you've got some, maybe a simile, a metaphor that you're going to build. It's just like, so sometimes giving them a set of transitions, not transitions that move to evidence, transitions that move between paragraphs, and transitions that move to elaboration, and they'll move to different kinds of elaboration. You have to start, when you're going to teach your kids about elaboration, you have to think about how you further what is said. So how you would add to it, how you would connect it to something that's really happened to you in the real world. So that's what I would do. That's one of the ways I would teach it. Sentence stems or sentence starters. That's another activity that would be really great, is if you take a better one, and maybe not this one, this is too long, but it could work because you don't need to do all of it, and you write a sentence starter for each sentence, but don't finish it. For example, and you have them write a body paragraph following your sentence starters. Sometimes just having those will help them. So it can assert, prove, explain, transition. I used to put like the lines, and I'd put in parentheses underneath the line transition, comma, and then I'd say, now explain the point. Long before you have them writing elaboration themselves, they need to be analyzing elaboration. This is a very grown-up academic way to do it, what I did with you. Another way could be take an essay, cut it into sections, and make them pull out the parts that are evidence, and just separate the parts that are evidence from the parts that are elaboration, like little strips of paper. This one is evidence, this one's elaboration. And then make a match. This evidence goes, I think this elaboration goes with this evidence. So you just have them kind of thinking about it in a critical way, but not creating it yet, just looking at it done well. So in that case, you'd have to find a decent essay that has the pattern that you're looking for, and that might be worth creating, one. I remember when I would try to pass out, whenever I taught transitions, I gave them this enormous list, and I literally taught lessons on transitions. I said, transitions are like doors in your house, right? There's internal transitions and external transitions. The external transitions are the ones that are your front door and your back door. They're big ones. They keep you safe, right? You lock them. But imagine if your house had no internal transitions, no doors inside. How would going to the bathroom look like at your house? How would changing your clothes happen in your house with zero internal transitions? And so then they get this we need them both. Yes, you do. And then I would give them these enormous lists, and I'd say pick 3 or 4 from each function. This provides more, these transitions indicate that you're going to compare and contrast things. These transitions indicate that you're going to, so I would find that list and I would make them pick 3 or 4 that they like and practice using those, and then they'd get redundant, and then they'd go back and pick a couple other. It's just, you can assign them. If you number them, you can just say, you're doing transition number 26, write a sentence, that's your transition, and the function of what you have to do goes with it. So you could just, and I see a lot of this practice could be kind of bell ringer activities that instead of walking in and saying, you know, what does this vocabulary word means? It means like, here's a piece of evidence, pick a transition from your list and write it, and then we're going to go around the room. And another thing that I've heard of in personalized learning that's really great is the teacher often picks her favorite no, if that makes sense. Like, this isn't right, but it's not right in awesome ways. How can we improve it? Where you get to be today's favorite no. Awesome, let's go to the board and let's do the favorite no and figure out how to improve it. So then you can always show, you can set an atmosphere in your classroom that, like, we're all wrong sometimes, even me. I picked the favorite no from my paper today. Look how bad, look what I did. Let's fix this. I think the biggest area that I see our students in this county struggling with and teachers needing a lot of support with is standard 5 work, which is basically analyzing from like phrases and words and sentences in paragraphs how something is going, whether it's becoming better or the functions are being fulfilled that are required in a paragraph. I also noticed that in the earlier clusters of our work that those requirements are in there. The idea that you have to create a main idea and that a main idea is a topic plus the point, and then you have to support it with specific details. So helping teachers and students with really finding the language to discuss text that they're reading that is no longer summarizing what it said, but moving into how it said it, which is really our craft and structure cluster, is the hardest thing for teachers and what I wanted to focus on mostly in this lesson, because once I give them these resources, they can begin to do this with kids in the room, and it becomes natural. Like, oh yeah, claim. Okay, we talked about that in standard 2, and specific detail, that's standard 2 work as well. So all I have to do is, we have to provide evidence. That comes right from the rubric. It's easy to identify the function of the sentences. So one of the things I used to do was do like on days that I had to grade a lot of essays, I called it the teacher-directed peer review. And so if you were all my students, you'd all get an essay. You'd all start with an essay, and I'd say, pass your paper back twice and to the right once. And then I'd say, now, you've just received a paper, and I want you to read and find the thesis sentence in this paper and underline it, go. And then 2 minutes later, I'd say, okay. And then I'd say, pass your paper to the right one more time and forward once. And I'd say, I want you to read the thesis statement and see if you agree or disagree, and I want you to improve the thesis statement. So I had every element of the paper looked at twice in some weird way. I might have even had the thesis looked at a 3rd time after we passed it. So every kid touched every paper, it felt like, and sometimes they peer reviewed parts of their own paper, which was okay. And they'd write their R2D2 next to what they did in the comments or whatever. But basically that solved my problem of anybody ever having a completely bad peer review, and everybody had at least parts that were really good, and more than one person looked at every part. So if we looked at the thesis a 3rd time, it might be, look at the thesis, now read the topic sentences for all the paragraphs. Do they match? Are they in order? And so I would give them sometimes the stipulations, like, we're looking at organization now, so I want you to see. And so they didn't have to figure out what they were commenting on. And so basically I graded 30 papers. I graded 30 papers that class period. It was fantastic. I felt really great. At the end of the day, I'd be like, I graded 100 papers at school today. And then I would say to the kids, I am going to be taking a paper from you in the next 3 weeks. Pick one of the ones we peer reviewed. So they got feedback on every single paper. We always peer reviewed. They got feedback on every single paper. They got to updraft any paper they wanted to and turn whichever one they wanted to turn into me. Never got parent complaints. Never got any emails from any parent, because if I took paper number 1, some kid did great on paper number 2 and they were awful on paper 1, and how could I pick paper 1? That was evil. I had to pick paper 2, right? I also didn't get all that bored because I was going to grade every paper. By the way, oftentimes I already graded every paper, right? So I only really had to look at the 4 things they may have improved when I fully graded them. I'd write my comments, and it was 4 different topics, so it wasn't even boring. I didn't read the same thing over and over and over again. So they got 2 big paper grades from me. Everything had always been peer reviewed. There was so much feedback. There was so much feedback in that room, and I never got parent complaints, so I remember. The other thing I started to learn to do when I had to grade like research paper, 11th grade, all the kids had to write research paper, is I would tell them I am going to grade the grammar for only 1 paragraph. And it's a random paragraph. You'll never know which one in your paper, assuming that whatever errors you make, you are generally going to make throughout your paper. So I will not be going through. And you just have to let it go, like Frozen, right? Just let it go sometimes. And then I'm going to grade the focus and organization in a different paragraph. So I didn't grade the whole paper for everything. As an English teacher, particularly, you can't grade everything. You heard me. You'll die. You'll literally die from grading everything. So I think you have to learn to focus on a thing in a piece of writing. The kids should be writing all the time, as much as you can get them writing, but you can grade just this paragraph, just for this thing. Sometimes they can write long, sometimes they can write short, and you just have to keep them writing and getting better. That would be one piece of advice. Another piece of advice I would give to teachers is, especially new teachers, it takes a long time to become a great teacher. It really does. It doesn't happen overnight. Some teachers maybe are more natural in things that they do and ways they interact with kids in the classroom, but ultimately pick something you want to professionally develop and then work on that particular thing. But do it with a focused purpose, and eventually you'll have a lot of things that you focused on and you will become an expert teacher. Finally, the last thing, which I really needed my first years of teaching. When I became a teacher, I didn't have a teaching degree. I walked from a business into private school and they hired me to teach English. I don't know what they were thinking. It was amazing. But I leaned on my students a lot. So we used to have class meetings all the time. I'd say, we've got to have a class meeting. I constantly asked them for their advice and input into what we did in the classroom, and learning to develop those relationships with those kids, learning to know their names, know what sports they play, know what, if they're into art or dancing or makeup, and build analogies from those things, open up understanding about complicated topics immensely. And you learn that even if they didn't like English, if they like you, they work hard in English because they want to please you. So work on the relationship element in your classroom, work on knowing your kids, draw them in at every opportunity to what you do in the classroom, and you will have a much happier year. Much happier year.